Welcome to the Lighter Side of the Spectrum, a podcast where we explore how to find joy, connection, and growth while navigating the challenges of parenting kids and teens on the autism spectrum. Remember that inclusion and hope are key to making life better for everyone, and that even in the most challenging moments, there's always a lighter side. Now here's your host, David Kaufer.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Lighter Side of the Spectrum. Glad you can join us. I am so excited today because I have a good friend and a very knowledgeable guest, Andrew Milivojevich. Did I get it, Andrew?
You nailed it.
All right, all that practice paid off. But let me give you a little intro to Andrew. He provided this, and I'm gonna spice it up because I do that in marketing. But Andrew is husband to an awesome wife and father of two great young adults, an engineer and statistician that consults with academia and industry in experimental development. And he's a co-author to Quality by Experimental Design, which is published by Taylor and Francis. I wanted to add, like I said, he's a great resource. He's a part of our spelling and autism community, but he's also the lead developer and designer, and I don't know what the official title is, Andrew, but that's a cool app that was used in that important research project at University of Virginia that I want to talk about in a little bit. So,
Sure.
Welcome, Andrew. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. I'm really stoked and glad to be here today.
So one of the things that we talk about, like I said, it's the lighter side of the spectrum, but we're autism dads, right? And there's something unique about being in that club, and it certainly is a club and a fraternity in many ways. But, I think it's helpful to kind of get a little background information. If you could kind of tell me briefly about your journey, and your son is Nicholas, right?
Right.
And just why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about like how old was he when he was diagnosed, and kind of like what were those early years like?
Well, he was very young, like up until about 6 months, all the developmental milestones were there. But then there was a period where after 9 months, 10 months, we start noticing him hand flapping a lot, doing things while in a seated position, and which we later on, it gets a label called stimming,
Right.
not knowing that's what you should give it. And then
Flapping. We called it flapping, right?
flapping, yeah, exactly. And delayed walking and whatnot. And I remember actually being at my ear and nose doctor, his office, and they had this little pad of paper. And prior to this, by the way, I should say, we went into our family doctor and we said, this just looks unusual. And he must be about 12 months by this time. And he had a bit of a rough journey, and within a month of being born, he had developed RSV, had to be intubated. So his days of life were quite rough.
Yeah.
But got through that, thankfully, and everything. And then the doctor basically said, oh, he's observing the stimming, and says, oh, he's a naturally excitable kid. Don't worry about it. And then when I was at the ear and nose throat specialist, I saw this information flyer talking about autism and some of the symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's when it started cluing in. And
You start kind of doing like a mental check, like you're kind of like check. Right.
Absolutely. And I'm like, hey, my wife Antoinette, let's, like delayed speech, the stimming,
Right.
and all that kind of stuff. And so we got referred to a developmental pediatrician, and by 18 months, we had the diagnosis of autism. And then everything after that was history, right? What can we do to best support our child?
Yeah. So it's been a long journey. You caught it early on, and then again, you kind of started doing all the things that we're told to do, right? Like early intervention and how important that is, which obviously it is. And then so kind of go through it, then education. Then what did they, and I just want to note, so you're actually in the Toronto, and you live in Toronto now, right? The Toronto area.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is all, so experience might be slightly different in terms of resources and experience in Canada versus kind of what we do here in the States. But
Well, I would say they're quite similar. Like
Okay.
back in the day, it was like, how do we get our kid into ABA therapy as much
Okay.
as quick and fast as possible, right? And that's what we did. We sought out the psychologists that were experienced in autism,
Yep.
put a program together for our kid. Where I think our family's experiences maybe deviated a little bit was by training, I'm a researcher, so I will do a literature search for all kinds of papers on autism, and I would do extensive readings, and then I'd find out what the best evidence was out there that suggested a type of therapy would be beneficial. And we would just start and try and do things that would be helpful. And a lot of it today explains where our son is today.
How so?
Well,
Yeah.
when you think about, people will talk about casein and gluten-free diets and
Oh, yeah.
whatnot. I go beyond that. Like, why are certain diets recommended? And what you end up finding, and the literature is getting up to speed in this point here, where they talk about the gut-brain axis.
Right. Yeah.
And digestion is a really, really important concept for our kids, and they often experience constipation issues and a variety of other issues. And at the end of the day, can you make it easier for them to digest food?
Yeah.
Right? And what you find is foods come in all different kinds of molecular structures that have to get broken down and then digested. Well, at the end of the day, if you can give a diet to your kid that doesn't have to spend so much time digesting, then they can absorb more nutrients more effectively. So case in point in me, if I eat a plate of pasta, my body will be so busy digesting, I'll go to sleep because there's no energy to digest.
Right.
So
Right.
when you look at our son right now, I mean, I wish I had his physique, but he looks like an Olympic swimmer.
Oh, wow.
And so, and then that kind of is philosophically, you can't cure the autism. At least there's no cure for it. And should there even be one, right?
Right. But
And
some of the symptoms, like you said, in terms of, I don't mean to interrupt. I was going back because I really love the way you described it, Andrew. I was going to say, I wish I had doctors who described it that well back when Stone was young and knowing what we know now, experiencing constipation, pain, right? Like a lot of these things, like I said, it makes sense if you can digest. And the reasons behind why do our kids have these issues, that's kind of like a different topic, but just understanding. And that, because I think, I don't know what the thinking is today. I know, again, back when Stone was young, so we're looking about 10 to probably 12, 13 years ago, when, again, I first kind of discovered diet and learning about that from naturopaths and research and my limited research. It was kind of revolutionary. And like, it was, and there were a lot of skeptics, right? I remember, kind of scoring this appointment at one of the leading local pediatricians here. The guy's supposed to be like one of the nation's top experts in autism. Mm-hmm. And I got an appointment with him when, like I said, Stone was probably 3 or 4, and we had just kind of started the gluten-free, casein-free diet. We're talking, he literally just stopped. Like, he's just like, oh, well, if you think that's going to help, okay, whatever. Wow. I've heard he has since changed his tune. Fortunately, he's seen enough kiddos and all. But
right.
Anyway, the point being, like, I think that there were skeptics. I don't know if there are still as many skeptics, if it's more accepted today, that this is like a real issue.
Yeah, well, no, it is. And I think it highlights one of the issues about autism, because when you try to look for issues that are unrelated, let's say, to autism, it's very easy to use that label and brush it off and say, oh, it's the autism. And then you ignore the other health issues because you're trying to explain it away as the autism, right? And a lot of these kids of ours, they have other underlying issues. The one today that stands out, which is leads into my tip of the day, is just the whole movement and developmental coordination that since 2015 now is being recognized as a core symptom of autism, and that's motor impairment. And I could talk about that for ad infinitum, and why that's very important to address, and something that doesn't get taken into consideration these days with a lot of our kids.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think in a lot of ways, kind of like I said, motor development, the role of motor, the role of apraxia, all of those related issues are kind of still at the early stages in terms of acceptance and acknowledgement. Right. I mean,
the DSM, which is the standard that doctors all use for diagnosing certain things, I believe the 2013 version finally acknowledged that you can have developmental coordination disorder co-occurring with autism, which is just the medical way of saying dyspraxia. And then I don't have to tell you about the wonderful work that Elizabeth Torres has done out of the University, or Rutgers University, that has shown there's an impairment in motor learning in our autistic kids. And that is so important to understand, because once you clue into it and realize it's an impairment, you can figure out how to address it and really improve the quality of life for our kids, so that they can experience things that they otherwise would never have had to experience. I can give you a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I love examples. I love stories.
Well, when you think, when you look at motor impairment in autism, the research that Dr. Torres has shown is that these movements, neurotypical people like you and I, we learn how to make the future movement more efficient based on our prior movements.
Right.
So when we learn to pick up a glass of water, for example, my hand might come on the top of it. My hand might slide down the side. My first experience is with that glass. And then when I learn what grip is comfortable and what makes it easier to lift and drink, then the future movement emulates that.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Right.
That mechanism in autism is impaired, and the impairment increases as the diagnosis of autism increases in severity as measured on an ADOS. So it means that this kinematic learning in autism gets impaired. And this is the epiphany for me.
Right.
Imagine what happens to social skills, because as you age with your peer group, and instead of sitting in a circle talking about a book and rolling a ball around when you're a toddler, now you're playing soccer, where the level of kinematic skill in gross motor and fine motor is far more higher as age, or the demand is so much higher as age increases, that our kiddos fall behind, and then that impacts their social experiences. So
That's a great point. And to be clear too, also, I just want to add again for our listeners who aren't as familiar about this, again, this has nothing to do with cognitive abilities, which is sometimes right. This is the mistake that so many make, right? Is that because there's this disconnect in terms of the motor, though, that does impair other areas in terms of communication and like some of these motor abilities, but they've been fused together to say, oh, well, they're just developmentally disabled or delayed.
You think about that touches on an interesting study by a psychologist out in Montreal who studied 40 autistic people. When you look at every test you can do to measure intellect or whatever, it depends on motor skills.
Right.
Well,
Everyone, like every test.
if the motor skills are impaired, then how do you expect to get an exact view
Accurate results.
of the person's intelligence? It's difficult. So you have to do things differently. And I wish today's academia field would recognize it, because they were faced with this problem in the 1930s and they solved it. And I don't know if you're aware of this, David, but when immigrants were coming into the United States at the start of the Industrial Revolution, you needed labor.
Right.
Well, a lot of these people couldn't speak English. So how would you test them in the English language to know whether or not they had the intellect to do certain types of jobs? Well, you had to invent a different test that wasn't based on language.
Oh, wow.
And so those are called your Raven's progressive matrices, and they've been around since the 1930s. And so this researcher, when she did that for these group of children that had impaired motor ability, which they couldn't control the fine motor muscles in their mouth to speak, they found that they lost their intellectual disability diagnosis.
Wow.
And
so why are we using those more?
Well, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
Is it just testing bias, or again, is it just one of those situations where again, the system's used to using these other standardized tests?
Yes, and that's the thing, because the community is when I mean the community, the people that want to do these assessments want to know if the tests have been normed against a certain population, right? So that you can compare normative values to the population to see where things are. So when you invent these new tests and you trial them on just a few people, you got to push hundreds of subjects through this area. So you'll often hear the term autism is very heterogeneous, right? So one of the things that prevents us doing this in the area of autism is how do you partition autistic people in different buckets, like maybe this group have some speaking ability and this group doesn't. And because the group is so heterogeneous, they don't know how to create the subpopulations to do these normative tests, right? So it gets very, very, very difficult, and that's why they don't do it. But that kind of goes into the study out of the University of Virginia and the innovative things we needed to do to test literacy, for example, right? And I like to say, autism doesn't care what your education is.
Right.
If you have a PhD in education and the person with autism has a neurological issue that impairs the circuitry in the brain that impacts motor, well, then I should be talking to a neuroscientist, right? And so you need a very diversified team of healthcare professionals, which thankfully here in Canada with our son, I mean, we've got a fantastic medical team, from neurologists to neuroscientists to developmental pediatricians and ophthalmologists and all kinds of things to support our kids. That's what they all need, right?
They do. And like you said, we've talked about, right, that fortunately you do have that team. And fortunately, you've been in a position that you've been able to build that team and support that team. Unfortunately, especially here in the U.S., where the healthcare system in general, again, isn't as supportive, we'll say. I think that's really hard for a lot of people to try to build that kind of a team anyway.
It is. And even in Canada, don't get me wrong, we have our issues up here. The parent really has to be, for lack of a better word, pushy and not take no for an answer.
I think that's universal, Andrew. I think we've learned that, right? Like that.
Yeah.
And again, that is kind of one of the pieces of advice I'm always giving when asked, or even when I'm not asked. It's just, especially for parents of younger kids who've either just gotten the diagnosis or starting school. I'm just like, you got to be pushy. Like you said, you got to push, because you're the advocate. Like, you're the one who's you have to make this happen, because others won't. They're going to do what they need to do, whether it's the school system doing the bare minimum, as you and I have both experienced. I hope you're enjoying the lighter side of the spectrum. So far, we're commercial free, but if you're finding value here, one way to support the show is by considering me for a speaking engagement. I speak on unlocking potential, whether it's for individuals like my son or for entire organizations. I also offer fractional CMO services for businesses needing strategic marketing support without the full-time commitment, drawing on over 35 years of experience in marketing. My agency has helped companies and healthcare practices increase their value, grow, and even prepare for acquisition. To learn more about my speaking topics, visit davidkoffer.com. Or if you're interested in our marketing or fractional CMO services, check out koffermarketing.com. If you're enjoying this episode, please leave a review. Your feedback means a lot, and it helps me make this podcast even more useful. Lastly, don't forget to share it with anyone who would appreciate the insights and stories we're sharing here. Thanks again for listening.
All of this stuff that I've just mentioned about motor impairment, I mean, what's the underlying good message out of all of that stuff, right? And in the case of our son, it was like, well, it's winter. I don't want to be indoors all day. I wonder if he can learn how to ski. Now, right away, others will say, well, he's got autism. There's no way we're going to be able to teach him come down a hill. Well, my son's been doing it now for 7 years. We just found a great program called Track 3, and it's a disability. It's a program to support kids with disabilities to learn how to ski.
That's awesome.
And so they pair you up with a couple of ski instructors, and they start on a bunny hill, and they teach you how to ski. Now my son goes to Glen Eden at the top of, after years of on a bunny hill, he was going on the big hill and doing all his S's all the way down the hill, right?
I love the videos. I remember you sharing them last winter, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Outings.
I mean, I'm at the bottom. I'm just rooting him like crazy. I'm happy as heck seeing that he can do something that otherwise he wouldn't have had a chance at doing because nobody would presume the competence, right?
Right. Those programs are gold. We're lucky enough to have something similar here in the Seattle area, which is called Outdoors for All.
Right.
And they do that, like it's a skiing. Yeah. And they do a ski program. Stone has participated in that previously. It's been a few years. He wants to do it again. So we're planning on doing that. They do cycling, a lot of those things, right? They're just wonderful programs for kids to give them those opportunities, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like I said, we'd like to have that little feature for the tip of the week. You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. So let's go ahead. Let's see if producer Dave is ready for the intro. I think.
Hey, parents, gather around. It's time to speak. We're here with your tip of the week. Strategies and wisdom just for you. Autism parents, we know what you go through.
All right, how's that for an intro?
I absolutely love it. It's great.
So what do you got for us?
Well, it's presumed competence, and I say that broadly. But you know, as your kids age, you don't want them to be withheld from activities that everybody else can participate in. So first, get over that hurdle and assume they can do it. And then find the program that suits their motor needs to actually be able to enjoy that program.
Yeah.
Like cycling, for example. I remember my son could ride a two-wheeler, but then turning was a bit of a hassle, and then he'd get dejected. Well, guess what? I got a tri-bike then. Now he can ride everywhere.
Cruise around, right. Those are awesome.
Do things. And next year, it's we're going to get a tandem bike and we're going to cruise together because at my age, I got to get exercise, and why not do some of that kind of stuff, right? And so get them into those activities that get them to not only engage in those activities other people do, but that gives them an opportunity to also socialize, right? I haven't found an autistic person that hasn't been in a social environment and have a sad face on them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think get out there and assume they enjoy those activities and just partake in them.
Well, yeah. And again, I was just going to say, that's another great point you make, Andrew. Again, in terms of social activities, again, I think one of the false narratives that we had heard for so many years. And I understood this with Stone when he was younger, is people are like, oh, they're just not social. Autistic people aren't social. I'm like, well, how social would you be if you can't talk? Like, how social would you be if I dropped you in the middle of, Beijing tomorrow and said, hey, why don't you go hang out with these people? You wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't know what the heck, they're saying. You wouldn't be able to, or maybe you would figure it out quickly, but you couldn't pick up the language. It's just, again, this assumption, this societal bias, right?
I've got a great example of that. We were at a picnic, and there was a soccer pitch there, and Nicholas was a teenager at this time, or maybe pre-teenager, and there was a group of kids playing soccer, and our son was just sitting on the bench. And all of a sudden, he gets up and he walks right into the middle of that group. And everybody's like, well, Nicholas, get out of the way, or get on the bench. And I come back and I'm like, no. He got up and he came in this group for a reason.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, that reason is he wants to participate. Don't tell me he's not wanting to be social.
That's inclusion there.
It's the motor that's preventing him from kicking or passing a ball. So guess what the group does? They adapt and they start passing him the ball, and he stays in the center and he starts passing it to everybody else. And while he's doing that, he's cracking the biggest smile on his face. And those moments,
that is awesome,
right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like I mentioned earlier, so we kind of met through the spelling community, right? And so you've been part of that journey, and we've shared lots of stories. But one of the things I think is really cool is what you're doing with Nicholas as an author. He's a book author, right? He's published multiple books now. Talk about that.
Yeah, he's got the third one, and the coloring. He had this idea for a coloring book. So
I don't think I'd heard about that.
Yeah, so the first, so he wrote his first book was he wrote a series on Detective Nick. And the first book was called Detective Nick, Case of the Missing Belly Buttons. I mean, right there, how do you come up with a title like that, right?
I love it.
And then the next one was Detective Nick, Where Did Mr. Creature's Cows Go? And talk about the presumption of competence. It's a story about cows that appreciate reading Shakespeare and can talk, but nobody believes them.
Oh, wow.
And they all want to go to the cowledge. I mean, it's how he comes up with this stuff to make a poignant societal point just throws me. And then the other one just recently this year was Detective Nick and the case, the mysterious case of the interstellar beings. And so he's quite the little short kids writer, which the story behind that is actually amazing. I don't know if you've ever read the Robert Munsch.
No, I haven't.
Robert Munsch is like probably the greatest selling children's author. And the first book that he wrote was, Love You Much, or something about how the mother takes care of the child. And then when the mother becomes elderly, the child then takes care of the mother. And I'm sorry if I'm not remembering the title, but he was an American who happens to now live in Guelph, Ontario, which is the city not too far from where we live. And so Nicholas loved his books, and he said, well, I want to be an author. I want to write some books. And like, how do you think we can ask Robert Munsch? And I'm like, well, I guess so. He says, why don't we just send him a letter, Dad? And so we did. And he responded.
Oh, how cool.
It was
cool. That's great.
And that was the motivation to this wonderful gentleman just sent a kind letter encouraging him to go forward and gave him all kinds of tips on how to get the book out there and whatnot. And that's how we ended up here today, right?
Yeah, you may have told me this before, and Andrew, but what was Nicholas's level of communication before spelling, before he was introduced to the spelling methodology? How was he reliable at all? Did he have speak? You know, how much speak?
No. He was non-speaking.
Yeah.
And I mean, he had words here and there. And when he was upset and he really wanted to communicate what he wanted, he could string out 2 or 3 words. But he was using sign language for a period of a time. And so it never went further. Not, I wouldn't say because of Nicholas. It was very difficult for my wife and I to learn it, because at the time, if you're an autistic parent and you don't have funding sources and you're trying to get all this ABA help for your kids and just get them all the supports that they need, you're paying for this out of pocket. So I remember
You're paying for it plus the time, right? Like,
well, that's the thing.
there's like bandwidth. I remember. Sorry, I just like because I remember people saying that to me, or asking us that, like, again, when Stone was young, they're like, "Well, why don't you just try learning sign language?" And I'm like, we're freaking drowning here, like, right? I mean, there's the very much that survival element, right? Again, we're focusing on the lighter side, of course, which we want to do, but the reality is that man, we're working all the time. Well, so you said trying different therapies and just still trying to be a parent, like I said, and then you have another son that you're parenting as Stone has a twin brother, like,
yeah.
So there's only so much that you can do also, right. I think, which plays into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why often, and I think I might have even used this term with you, like, do you have the privilege of time?
Right.
And
it is a privilege, without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
All right. So this is a good lead, and because we're talking about family and stresses and things like that. And again, something we've talked about. So let's go. This is our fact or fiction, autism fact or fiction segment. All right. See if we have an intro for that.
Get QuickTime ready, and here we go. This is Autism Fact or Fiction. We're breaking down what's real, what's rumor, and what might surprise you. Let's go.
So that's we're gonna call her Sabrina. Just I'm gonna steal that from producer Yaz's podcast. He loaned her out to us from ChatGPT. But so for fact or fiction, autism fact or fiction, one of the things I remember hearing early on was that I've been lucky enough. I have a great supportive wife. We've been married 27-ish years. I know you in similar situation, but I don't know. You always hear that the divorce rate is higher among couples with autistic kids or special needs kids.
Oh, so I would say that's true.
So you're going with fact.
Yeah, I'm going with fact.
Okay, so at least again, according to our AI friend.
Well, actually, I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. So the belief that divorce rates are higher among couples with autistic children is largely a myth. Research in the past decade has shown that while parenting a child with autism does bring unique stressors, these couples do not have a significantly higher divorce rate compared to parents with neurotypical children. As a matter of fact, a 2010 study from the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders found that while parents of autistic children face distinct challenges, their marriages are no more likely to end in divorce than other marriages. In fact, some studies even indicate the couples raising children with autism may experience a stronger sense of partnership and shared purpose, which can have a stabilizing effect on the relationship. So it can strain relationships. I
love that last part you just said, because when I think about my wife, we are such a tag team. Like,
right.
We don't know what we would do without each other, right? Because that's how we make it work, right? So I totally believe in that, because that shows up in our marriage.
Yeah, I think, same here. It's divide and conquer, right? It's a partnership. You have to do, I think it's really kind of the only way you make it work. And it requires that level, of commitment to the relationship, to the family, to really see that through. So I thought that was really kind of interesting, right? Because I remember, like I said early on, it's like, okay, as if we didn't have to worry about, you're getting like these messages like, well, good luck with that marriage now.
Well, you know what? This is one of the, when I'm being tested, I like to be right, but this is the first time I'm really glad I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, like I said, again, a message of hope for, like I said, the other parents out there, right? Who may be challenging. So like we were joking about this before we started, there's so much more to talk about. And I want to get into, like I said, well, there's going to be a part 2 or part 3 for sure. We'll bring you back. But one of the things we talked about spelling, and I've touched upon this. I'm always going to be talking about it in each of my podcasts because it's just an incredible journey with Stone. But I thought you had a really interesting observation about how kind of comparing the stages of spelling for parents, how it's similar to startups in a way. Like, so you talked about the storming, forming, and norming, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit and just kind of again how you've seen that kind of play out, maybe in your own experience, but also again you've talked to and become friends with a lot of other families,
right? Well, once you you go down this path and you realize the world can open up, and what communication actually does for you, you feel this kind of euphoria. This is great.
Absolutely.
And so it's a natural high. But then as time goes on, it's like, okay, how am I going to sustain this? We need more training. We got to develop the motor skills. There's a kinematic learning process. There is so much more that we need to do to now maintain this.
Education, right? Like catching up on education. I mean, that's another,
there's all of that stuff. And so, and then even generalizing to other people and giving the speller an opportunity to interact and work with other people that know how to use the methodologies and whatnot to support the needs of the speller. And then you get to this maturity point. It kind of hit home for us where I just turned 60. And my wife, I'm not going to say what her age is because if she finds out, she'll
smart man.
But what happens when we're not here? Right? They're going to live on. They're going to keep on going. And so now the challenge is how to get them the motor support they need to get to a point of some reliable way of independence so that they don't have to depend on other people, because then it turns into that privilege of time. We can afford the time now and give our son whatever he needs. But now we're thinking about that next stage in life, because I could run around the block. It wouldn't be an issue. Now walking is you're feeling the age. You know what I mean? Like your son's an adult. You're getting to be a senior. You can tell by the color of my head. It's white. I've been there for a while. And so you're slowing down. I like to take naps in the afternoon, maybe. Right.
Yeah.
So
we change.
So we change and we can't keep up with these kids. So how do you give them that level of support when they're in their prime and you're not, right? So that's some of the stuff that everybody is going to go through and experience. And
it's just like everything else, right? Yeah. Like it's just different stages. Right. And like I said, I thought it was just a really keen observation. Cause like I said, it's similar to, again, what we went through. And I think that's the perfect word. Again, it's euphoria, right? Like there's just nothing like that the first time they're communicating, like we hitting those milestones when they.
Well, what really bothers me is how autistic people are emotionally treated, right? Like when you interact with another person through this unique mode of communication called speech, and you can show your facial features and show the emotions you're feeling and how that resonates with another person. If autistic folks aren't showing those emotions, that doesn't mean they don't have them. But then what it means is the reciprocating person develops a mindset of that person and then treats them more, I don't want to say as a person just standing there, an inanimate object, but that the level of emotional appreciation is not there that would be with the neurotypical people. And this is what this beautiful form of communication provides. It enhances love, right?
Yeah, it sure does.
And so much of that is missing from our society today. I mean, so much of what we see in the news is just, you know,
yeah, a lot of divisiveness, a lot of
absolutely. And this is why I love autistic parents, because for me, a measure of love is the amount of time and sacrifice and effort that people give of themselves to other people. I mean, there's only one reason why you do that.
Yeah.
You love your kids, right? And you want to give them the best life possible. I love being immersed in that type of crowd because
I do too.
I feel the love, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like, you know, again, it was so great that you and I had the opportunity to meet in person when you were out here on your big family road trip, right? And
Yeah,
just that afternoon that we all got to spend together, the families, and that was really special for everyone. I mean, Stone still talks about it and looks at the pictures.
That was, and thank you for reminding me. I got a ton of pictures. I haven't posted them yet.
Oh, okay.
I got to do that, right? I need that privilege of time. But that's the reason why we flew the whole family from Toronto over to Vancouver, went to Bellingham, and then went to Seattle and back again, right? We just love the community out there. Every time I see you guys advertising, what is it?
Beans and boards. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, I wish I could be there, right? I can just imagine the love, the happiness and joy that's going to be inside that crowd. It's a wonderful thing, right?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that, again, it is another form of privilege too, to have that opportunity. And this is just a message that I'm going to a drum I'm going to continue to beat on this podcast, because frankly, again, for so long, I didn't have community when Stone was young. There weren't Facebook groups. There weren't a lot. We've come a long ways, and it's just so valuable for mental health. And we know that we need to have our mental health, right? We need to be on our game to be there,
right,
for our kids, whether they're kids or whether they're young adults.
Yeah.
And so I just really encourage people to, reach out and find, they're out there now. We know that all over, they're out there virtually, right. and if not in person, try to do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When my son cracks a smile, it's a great day. Like I can feel it. I can absolutely feel it. And so that's what I want to return back to him and anybody else out there, right, that we meet.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, like I said, there's so much to talk about. We're going to definitely have to do part two. Part two, I want to talk about the study a little bit more, let people know about that, because I think that's important. And the app, again, that you created and some other things. But, that will have to wait for our next get together. But, thank you so much again for joining me. This has been awesome.
Oh, no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for the opportunity and look forward to coming back again.
Yeah, and thank you, audience members, for joining us. Catch us next time on the lighter side of the spectrum.